All right, so now let's talk about calculating overtime. You're going to love this. I just know it. You guys are lucky though, because I get to work out all my goofs and my mistakes in the class right prior to this one, so you get the polished version. All right, so there are actually two ways to calculate overtime. And the way that you're the most familiar with is the way that we're probably going to use the least. We're going to use another method of calculating overtime. Both methods end up with the same result. But the reason we're going to use this other method of calculation is because we've got some of those complicated where I said we've got non-exempt employees that are salaried. If those individuals work varying schedules each week, so for example, they work 50 hours one week and 30 hours another week, and that's a regular thing for the job that they're in, they may be, we have to calculate their overtime using this second method, okay? We have to use this second method. But the first method is just the common method. So, and this is the method that you're familiar with. So let's just say we have somebody who, they make $10 an hour and they work 42 hours in the week. How would you calculate their overtime? What would you do? If that was your paycheck, how would you figure ahead of time? Because I know all of you, you've got that accounting mind. You're going to calculate your paycheck before you get it.
2 times 25? Or no, times 10, $15?
So 15, right. So we get our overtime rate, which is going to be 10 times 1.5. $15 an hour is our overtime rate. This is our regular rate. Okay, so we know what our overtime rate is. Then how would we calculate what the pay is? $40 times 10, okay. So that's the 40 hours that we worked at regular time. Whoops. 400. And then what? All right, 2 times 15. Our overtime rate, 30, for a total of $430. This is our common method. This is the method that we're all familiar with. This is the method we'd all use to calculate in our head about what our gross pay would be if we knew that we had worked some certain number of hours of overtime, right? Figure out what our regular rate is, figure out what our overtime rate is, multiply the regular hours by our regular rate, multiply the overtime hours by our overtime rate, and then add the two together. There's another way to do it. It's called the overtime premium method. And like I said, this is the method that we're going to use. Hopefully you can all see this. What we would do, we've got 42 hours. We would multiply all 42 hours by our regular rate. And then we would want to calculate what our overtime premium is. This is the amount that is over and above our regular rate that we're getting paid for those hours on an hourly basis, right? So to figure out what our overtime premium is, we're going to take our regular rate and we're going to multiply it by 0.5. This is our overtime premium. This means that we are making an extra $5 per hour when we work overtime. Then we're going to take our 2 hours of overtime and we're going to multiply it by our premium rate. I guess I could do that. This is our overtime premium. $430. Same result. Obviously, the first one is probably a little bit easier for us to conceptualize, and it's the one that we're most used to. But like I said, we've got to become familiar with this overtime premium approach because in lots of our problems in this chapter, we've got to use this approach in our calculations. Okay, so all you're going to do with the overtime premium is you're going to take the total hours times the regular rate, and then you're going to take the overtime hours times the overtime premium rate and add those two together. Questions?
So if the overtime was double, you would just multiply it by 1 rather than
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We don't have any problems where we multiply it by, where we do that. Because that would be a situation where the employer has decided to pay more than what's mandated. Do you want me to do another problem, or are we good?
Are there situations where you would have to use overtime?
Yes. And it's where you'd have to use the overtime premium. When we have the fluctuating work weeks that I had mentioned, where one week you work 30 hours, the next week you work 50, and that's a regular feature of the job, that it's just all over the place. In order to calculate what the overtime rate is, this is the method that we use. Oh.
Do we have time to see an example of that, or?
Yeah, in fact, let me see if I don't know if they gave us a slide here with an example or not. No. But we will be using one. I'll use some different rates. Well, you guys can give me some rates. We'll do it both ways. Okay, so what's the regular rate? 15? Okay. $15 an hour. How many hours did they work? 45. Okay. 45 hours. Ugh. All right, so in the common method, what are we going to do? We're just going to take the 40, right, times the regular rate. So we'll calculate first the regular rate. So 40 times 15, which, what do we get here? 600? All right. And then the overtime, we're going to take the 5 hours of overtime times, we'll just do 15 times 1.5 here, which is 2250. That's 2250. Okay, we'll do that here. Times 5 hours. 112.50. So here's our regular pay. Here's our overtime. So 712.50 for that. Move my line here. All right, so for the overtime premium, we're going to take the total hours. So gross pay, all hours worked, including the overtime hours. So we've got 45 hours times our regular rate, which is 15. $675. And then our overtime premium, we're going to take the overtime hours in excess of 40. Get this out of here. I'm going to need it, but I need to move it. Times our overtime premium rate. So our overtime, we can do this, so 5 times 15 times 0.5. Let me do 0.5 there. So that's 750. What's that? 37.5. Add those two together. 2, 1, 7, 12, 50. Same result. Let's see. All right. Now, what happens? Questions? So the only difference, well, I mean, there are a couple of differences, I guess. When we're calculating regular hours, it's at the full number of hours at our regular rate, and then that overtime premium, instead of using 1.5, we're using 0.5. So what happens, where is it? I gotta go back here. When we have two different rates, but the employee has worked overtime. So this occurs when we have an employee that's working a couple different jobs and they're paid at different rates. So let's say you work at a restaurant and you worked as a dishwasher for 20 hours and you worked as a cook for 22 hours during the week. Well, you worked 2 hours of overtime. There are 3 different ways that we could calculate how much that overtime rate is. Now, before, when we compared the common method with the overtime premium, we got the same result. These 3 are going to give us 3 different results. Now, it's important that the employee understands how it's calculated. The employer can choose any of these methods. Some are going to be more advantageous to the employee, or, well, one of them's more advantageous, one of them's less advantageous, the other one is somewhere in the middle. And the employer can choose whichever one they want, but they have to be clear with the employee how it's going to be calculated. So we can just pay the overtime at the higher rate. Okay, well, that's easy enough. So in our example, we've got they worked 20 hours as a dishwasher. Let's say they got $8 an hour for that. They worked, and it really wouldn't matter how many, if they worked any of these in overtime. 22 hours as a cook, and they made $12 an hour. Now, we don't know by this which job they were working in overtime, right? It could be that those 2 hours were worked at the $8 an hour, because the first 22 could have been worked at $12, and then the last 20 could have been worked at $8, which means that those last 2 hours were worked at the $8 an hour job. It could be that one of them was worked at the $8 an hour job and one of them was worked at the $12 an hour job. We don't know. We don't have enough information here to tell, just with this information. But the first method you don't need to know. Okay, so the first one, you just pay it at the higher rate. So in this case, we'd take 20 hours times $8 an hour. And then we'd take 20 hours times $12 an hour, which is, did I get that right? 6, yeah. All right, so why am I struggling with this? 240. And then those last 2 hours of overtime, so this is regular rate, overtime here. The 2 hours are going to be paid at the higher rate. So we'll just say 2 hours times 12 times 1.5. And you're going to see in the next example, they're going to use the overtime premium method for doing this calculation. You can do it either way. It's fine. I'm just using the common method here at first. So 12 times 1. What is that? 18. So 36. And then we add them all up. 7, plus 6 is 13. $436. So this is, we just paid it at the higher rate. Not going to worry about which hour. So as far as record keeping goes, this is easy because you don't have to keep track of when they worked which job, although you probably should anyway, just for management purposes. You should probably know how many hours they were working in each job category, but you can just agree to pay at the higher rate. So this is option 1. Option 2, this is using a weighted average. So in this case, and this is probably the most difficult one of the three to calculate, calculate total earnings for all jobs and then divide it by the total hours worked, then take 1/2 of this rate, here's where we're looking up or calculating our overtime premium, and multiply it by the overtime hours. Okay, let's take these one by one. So, calculate our total earnings for all jobs. All right, so we've got 20 times 8, 160. 22 times 12. I'm going to have to use a calculator for that one, unless somebody wants to give it to me. 264? Okay. Okay, so our total earnings, 424. Where am I here? We're going to divide that by the total number of hours worked, 42. All right. So 464 divided by 42. This is our average rate, our weighted average hourly rate. So 1105. We're going to round that. This is what we're going to use to calculate our overtime premium. We're going to take 1/2 of that rate and multiply it by the overtime hours. Where did I get 264?
You said 464 divided by 42. It's supposed to be 4.
It's 424. Did I say 4? I may have said 464. Oh, did I do 464 here? Okay. 424 divided by 42. Okay, 1010. Thank you. I expect you guys to, thank you. I expect you to correct me because that happens. 10. That's our weighted, and I should have known that because, well, yeah, I mean, it's roughly, if you kind of logic your way through it, they worked slightly more hours at the $12 an hour rate. Halfway between those two is $10 an hour. So if it was equal, then our weighted average would be $10 an hour. So that's just a little bit more than $10 an hour. So that makes sense. All right. And then we're going to multiply it by 0.5. So 505. This is our overtime premium rate. All right, so for each hour of overtime, they're going to get paid an additional $5.05. They had 2 hours of overtime, so 2 times 505. We're just going right back to 1010. That's our overtime premium. We're going to add it to this. $434.10. So this is option 2. That's our weighted average. I know.
The correct term is weighted average. So
yes.
The problem says that averages.
Yeah, exactly. So it's weighted average. It's weighted for which one, I mean, and it's weighted because we had more hours at that higher rate. So it's taking into account the number of hours that we worked at each of those rates. So that's the second option. The third option, so in both of these, we don't need to know which job they worked at in overtime, right? We don't need to know that information. The third option, we do need to know that information. So let's say that they actually worked the overtime in the $8 an hour. So they worked 2 hours of overtime and they were a dishwasher when they were working those 2 hours of overtime. So option 3 here, what we're going to do is we're going to use an overtime rate that's based on the rate for the job performed beyond the 40th hour. So this is kind of the fair method, right? I mean, they're all fair, but this one is you get paid at the rate for the job that you actually performed during overtime. So if that happened in the dishwasher, the $8 an hour job, so we would have regular rate 18 hours at $8. We would have regular rate 22 hours at $12. And then we'd have overtime of 2 hours times 8 times 1.5. Now, I think they use the overtime premium method for this calculation in their example as well. So we'll go through those also. So, again, total of 40 hours. I'm sorry, 42 hours. So, 18 times 8, 144. 22 times 12, 264. And then, what is that? 12, 8, 8. I can't think of that. 12 times 2. I don't know. Oh, I did plus 2. Sorry. So 12 times 2 is 24, right? Yes. There's our overtime. So 12, 10, 13, 432. There's our option 3. All different rates, all different amounts. Obviously, as far as the employee is concerned, the first option is probably. I mean, I don't know. Maybe maybe at some point option 2 would be better. I don't know. But option 1 would probably mostly give you the highest pay for the employee because you're paying that overtime at the highest rate, regardless of whether they worked during that time or not. Let's look at this example that they give us as well. Like I said, they're using the overtime premium method here. So we've got Oshiko worked for Tinto Incorporated in 2 capacities. Job A paid $14.50 per hour. He worked 37 hours. Job B paid $11 an hour, and he worked 6 hours at this job. Overtime is 3 hours. Again, this information, they have not given us enough information to know which job he worked those extra 3 hours in. But we know that he worked 3 hours of overtime. So what they've done here, regular pay, they've taken the full hours. So they've taken the 37 hours worked at $14.50, 6 hours worked at $11 an hour and added those together to get our regular, which is what we did here as well. Well, we didn't do that here because we didn't take, I went up to just the 40 hours. I didn't use the premium method. This is using the premium method, so this looks a little bit different. You'd arrive at the same result. $602.50, that's our base amount. Overtime premium on the higher rate, again, we're just going to take the $14.50 times 0.5, and then he worked 3 hours of overtime. We're going to use that higher rate. Means that he makes $21.75 for overtime. Total amount of pay, we're just going to add those two together, $602.50, $21.75. So $624.25 is the amount of pay. Now, if you want to see what it would look like if we did it the regular way, I'm running out of time though. I want to get through these other slides. If you want to see what it looks like, I can start next class period doing that if you want me to do that. But I want to show you the other calculations. So that's option 1 at the higher rate. Method 2, this is our weighted average. So we start with the same regular pay, that $602.50, which they calculated on the last slide. And then we divide that by the total number of hours worked, 43 hours. This gives us our weighted average rate. Hourly rate is $14.01. We figure the overtime premium based on that rate, that weighted average rate, which comes out to $7.01. Multiply that by the 3 hours and add those two together, they get $623.53. Okay, so the first option is better for the employee than the second option, but not as good for the employer. Method 3, now we need to know, so it tells us over here, I think in this one, 6 hours at this. Do they tell us what he, 550. I don't know if they give us enough information, but they've answered the question. Overtime is 3 hours. Did they say it back here? All right, so it's job B. They're telling us that job B, overtime premium at job B rate. They weren't real clear about that, but it's job B that he worked the overtime in. Start with the same regular pay, $602.50. Add the overtime premium at the job B rate. So $550 is our overtime premium for job B, because that's 11 divided by 2, or 11 times 0.5. Add those two together, it's $619. So obviously the third method is the least advantageous for the employee. Questions? Sorry, I know we kind of tried to shove a lot in there. We're going to try to do even more on Thursday. All right.